Hey everybody, how's it going? Today's video is all about time trial training. It's not necessarily a strength of mine, but it is something that I enjoy, and hopefully some of the advice that I can give you will help you get that a little bit faster as well. It's not just applicable to time trial training, it's applicable to all sorts of getting faster on a bike. This video isn't just going to focus on time trialing, it's also going to focus on getting faster on a bike, because for some reason average speed seems to be a big target for a lot of people. Whilst it's not something that I ever really think about, because I think largely average speed on a bike ride is irrelevant, because if you change your location, if the weather changes, all of a sudden it all becomes irrelevant. But average speed over a duration or over a distance, like a time trial, that is then quite important. So there are similarities, and I think it's worth focusing on both of those. So if you want to get faster, this video is also going to help you as well. First off, we're going to kick off with preparation, and that's basically assuming that you've cleaned your bike, you're fresh enough and you're ready enough to do a time trial, as in you've not done a big hard ride the day before because it's an event or it's an important day to you and you want to be fresh to get the most out of your body. So you want to select the kit that you're going to wear. So if you want to go fast on a bike, generally speaking, you want to be more aerodynamic. Not just tight fitting clothing, but also just the textiles that are used in creating that item of clothing are going to help make you faster. You know, there's loads that they do these days with tripping of the wind and things like that. So time trial suits and aerodynamic kit can be mega expensive. If it's too expensive or inhibitive because of that, then simply tight-fitting clothing is going to be a lot better than a baggy jersey. That's a fact. There is one really important thing that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is you do not need power meters, heart rate monitors, cadence sensors, speed sensors, anything like that. All you need to know and all you need to have is basic understanding of your body and your ability to push yourself. So I think it's really important to hammer this home, because cycling is just one of those sports which seems to cost an ever-increasing amount of money. You know, even socks have gone up in price, for example. You can buy aero socks and all the rest of it, but you don't need any of it to improve yourself as an athlete, as a bike rider. What you can do is get used to riding max intensity to duration. So if you know how hard you can push yourself for an hour, and you know how that feels in your legs, you can then take that to an event. And equally, if you know that you can push yourself really, really hard for 3 to 5 minutes, you can extrapolate that out and turn it into how hard you can push yourself for a 20-minute time trial or for a 30-minute time trial and things like that. The most important thing, and I think a lot of people neglect this as they use technology, is that it's still you propelling the machine, and you still need to have an understanding of how your body reacts and how your body responds to the effort that you're putting in. There's no good having a power meter thinking that you can hold whatever number, 400 watts for example, for a set period of time, getting halfway through that effort and realising that actually you were wrong because you were too ambitious, or because something wasn't calibrated correctly, or for whatever other reason that they could have been. That's why all of these efforts can be done without power meters, cadence monitors, heart rate monitors, any of that. They are great tools, I'm not going to dispute that, but you don't need them. Once you've selected the kit that you want to wear for the time trial and the kit that you want to use and your bike's all clean, then the next place to pay the most attention to is the food. So time trials, or hard, short efforts where you're trying to pace yourself to go really, really quickly over a set duration, it's all about making sure that you can breathe deep and that you're not going to be seeing your breakfast or your lunch again. So you want to allow a good 3 hours, I would say, after you have your last snack or your last meal. So if it was really short and intense, so like a 4-minute pursuit on the track, you may want to allow up to 4 hours. If it's a slightly longer event, meaning that you're going to need a lot more energy, so over an hour, then you could probably bring that down to around 2.5 hours. But I wouldn't want to eat any closer to my event than that, simply because you're going to be pushing yourself really, really hard. You don't want the blood, you don't want any extra energy being used in your stomach and your digestive system, when it could be powering your legs along, helping power your heart and lungs as well. And then the next crucial part that goes along with that is, of course, making sure that you're really well hydrated as well. You don't want to be so hydrated that you haven't to go to the toilet on the start line, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're optimally hydrated. And this is one of those things that it takes a little bit of time to play around with. Everyone's going to be different. Everyone has different hydration requirements. I drink quite a lot personally, so for me that would be drinking a good 500ml bottle in the final hour before the event, and probably in the preceding 3 hours a good litre on top of that as well. Again, that's just personal. From experience, I know that I need a lot of water because I do, or a lot of fluid because I do sweat a lot. A hydration tab or a cup of hydrate drink will be more easily assimilated into your body than just water as well. So we're well prepared, meaning we're well rested, our bike's clean, we've fed ourselves properly, so that's a meal around 3 hours before the event, we've hydrated well. The most important thing now to get the most out of yourself at the event or on the day where you want to set a really fast average speed is to have a good warm-up. So that's a good 12 to 20 minutes. So I would start off pedaling really gently, not forcing anything, just 5 minutes, just turning your legs at sort of like walking pace, and then do 5 minutes a little bit faster. So you'd up your cadence by 5 revs per minute. That's quite easy to count in your head if you haven't got a cadence monitor. And then every 5 minutes, aim to add another 5 revs per minute to that as well, and up the intensity ever so slightly each time. Basically, over that 12 to 20 minutes, you want to ramp up and up, and get to the 20-minute mark with your heart rate at around 90% of your maximum heart rate, dripping in sweat, legs really going, heart and lungs really pounding, then you back it off for a couple of minutes, and then you're absolutely ready to go and do a time trial. I'll include a little warm-up in the description down below, one that I think personally works really well. It's a lot easier to read through it than it is to listen to it. And then you should be absolutely raring to go. Personally, I always found if I was doing a warm-up that if my legs were really happy to rev and my heart and lungs were really happy to breathe deep and I was able to push on, I knew that was going to be on for a good day. But equally, if I wasn't feeling that great and I was feeling a little bit sluggish and took a while to get going, I just found that a longer warm-up and then with a little bit more intensity towards the back end of it, so maybe a couple of 1 minute efforts at like 80 to 85% of my max 1 minute effort, would really help not just wake my legs up, but also help get my mind in the right place as well. So it's quite important to play around with your warm-up. It doesn't have to just be a strict regimented warm-up each time, because every day you're going to feel slightly different, so you have to be adaptable to that as well. I think that's quite important, and I think that's something that actually a lot of people overlook. So imagine you've had a busy day at work and you're doing an event in the evening. It might take a little bit longer to get going than it would if you're doing an event on a Saturday morning and you're 100% up for it, for example. So imagine it is a time trial that you're doing. So in the UK we do a lot of 16-kilometre time trials or 10 miles. You want to make sure you get to the start line with a good few minutes to spare, because that will give you time to take off any extra kit if it's cold outside and leave your long sleeve jersey or your leg warmers on the side of the road or with the timekeeper or with a friend. But also it'll give you time to make sure that you're in the correct starting gear, and it just gives you those few minutes of peace just before the effort starts. Maybe you want to listen to a last little bit of music to help get your mind in the correct place. But being on the start line on time means you're in no danger of missing your start. Believe it or not, even at the highest level, that still happens. People miss their starts because they're either trying to spend longer warming up, or there's a little change on the bike that they want to make, which I probably should have included in the preparation. If you're making changes to your bike on the day of the time trial, or on the day of the event, that's just asking for trouble. So you want to avoid all of those things as well. Standing on the start line is quite a weird period of time because you feel quite apprehensive, I think, on the whole. Yeah, your mind's focused and you know exactly what it is you have to do. You'll be working out your pacing strategy, which we'll come on to in a second. Don't let that get the better of you. I think it's really important just to know that what you're about to do, know that you can do it for a start. Also, don't be too scared of the effort you're about to make. You know, you've chosen to do it, so yeah, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt more than you can push yourself, as in you're in control of your pain. And I think that's quite a nice thing about time trialing, is that actually you are 100% in control of what it is you're doing. And if you start pushing yourself and you start hurting, that's your own doing, and you can back off a little bit, or you can push on through it if you enjoy it and you're good at that. Then I think it's quite unique. It's quite a different discipline to any other sort of sport, any other sort of cycle sport, that is. And because of that, I think it's got its own unique appeal. I'm going to add right at this point that I'm not a time trialist by any stretch of the imagination. I would always have minutes put into me into a time trial by most riders, and it was rare that I'd ever finish in the top 50% of a time trial field. But weirdly, I just enjoy riding time trials. I quite like the whole process of you're aiming for a certain goal, you know, you're aiming for a set pacing strategy. It's all about you out on the road. There are no excuses. It's very black and white. You either do well or you don't do well. And also the goals, they're quite specific to yourself, I feel. Whereas, you know, when you're racing, you're kind of dependent on a lot of other things happening for your result to come about, certainly as a sprinter. Whereas in the time trials, it's completely under your controls, and I was quite happy, you know, if I got into the top 50% of the field, it meant I'd kind of done quite well on that day. Anyway, so these are all the tips and the pointers that I've picked up over the years from a discipline that I enjoy, even though I didn't excel at it. Right, so pacing. This is my absolute favourite aspect of time trialling, something that I think I've, over the years, managed to dial in quite well. Years ago, in 2011, I did a race in Mallorca, and it started with a time trial, a prologue, and I set out, I'm not going to go too hard. And whether or not you know about power numbers, I did 550 watts for the first minute, and I remember thinking, yeah, I'm on for a really good ride here. By the end of the 10-minute time trial, it was roughly, I hadn't even averaged 400 watts. There was a huge, great drop-off. I was really smug, really proud of myself, and I got back, uploaded the file, my coach read it, and he said, I remember him quite clearly swearing at me. He said, who do you think you are? Fabian Cancellara, setting off that hard? What were you thinking? And from that day on, I paid a lot more attention to pacing. So basically, if you go out too hard, you are just going to blow up. You're going to fill your legs with lactic acid, and you simply won't recover from it, and you'll end up with a positive split, meaning that the first half is a higher power average than the second half. And generally speaking, that's not going to be the fastest way to ride a time trial. On the whole, you want to ride a negative split, although there are caveats to that. For example, if you were to ride uphill on the way out into a slight headwind, but your return leg was downhill with a tailwind, it's going to be really hard to make a big difference on that return leg. So actually then is a good time to do a positive split. Also, if the route is hillier in the first half, you're probably going to benefit more by doing slightly more power over that first half. If you're doing 54 kilometers an hour with a tailwind, it's quite hard to up that to 56 kilometers an hour. Whereas if it's a headwind and you're doing 40 and someone's doing 45, for example, there's going to be a much bigger difference, certainly if that's over a longer period of time. So you really want to pay attention to the actual course. Every course is going to have its own unique pacing strategy. On the whole, I'm talking about time trials and efforts that are lasting shorter than an hour. Above that, fortunately, I've only ever done one, and it was a particularly horrid experience. But again, a negative split for a longer time trial becomes increasingly important, because if you dig yourself a massive hole in that first half, it's going to be really, really hard to recover and then build on it on the second half. What's really important is that you always think about speed. Time trialing is all about going fast. So if you're slowing down on the climbs because you're trying to ride within yourself, it's not necessarily going to be the optimum way to speed up. So if you ride a real flat power curve, for example, so you maintain the same power on the uphills as you do on the downhills, it's very unlikely that you're going to go really fast, because on the downhills, it's very hard to make a big difference in time unless it's very technical. You're not getting those recoveries after the climbs like the other riders are if they're pushing on that little bit harder over the climbs, and therefore you're not optimising the speed that you have available to you. Talking about a small percentage here, it's not that you're going really, really hard on the climb and then freewheeling all the way down the downhill. It's that you're applying a little bit more thought to it than you would if you're riding an even pacing strategy. So push on a little bit, 5 to 10% maybe on the uphills, back off a little bit on the downhills, get up to speed and then back off. That's quite important. On the flats, try and maintain the speed that is as close to your actual capacity as possible, and then push on again in the last few minutes, the last 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how long your time trial is. That's the time where you really want to be ramping it up towards the finish. I touched on this a second ago, and time trialing is all about speed. So it's not necessarily that you're worried about maintaining a set power or a set breathing rhythm or heart rate. It's that you're trying to maintain the fastest possible speed you can whilst maintaining the optimum efficiency for you. So that means the correct pacing strategy, which we were talking about before. So at all times in the back of your mind, you want to be thinking, am I going as fast as I can for the least amount of effort as possible? Meaning that you'll have more in reserve for the final part of the time trial, or rather more in reserve for when it really matters. And there's one really good way of doing that, and that's making sure you're as aerodynamic as possible. Now, aerodynamics are essentially free, unless you're talking about buying equipment, but the biggest percentage of an aerodynamic package is the rider himself or herself. So making sure that you're neat and compact and tidy on the bike is the most important thing. And this applies, in fact, these days to all parts of riding a bike, because you want to be neat and tidy when you're sprinting to make sure that you're not wasting power there. I found out myself that it's worth 250 to 300 watts just changing your sprinting position. And the same applies to time trialing. Certainly, if you're doing a really, really fast circuit and it's around, maybe you're doing speeds of up to 40 miles an hour at different times, being aerodynamic is not only going to save you a huge amount of energy, it's also going to mean you can go a lot faster later in the ride as well. Right then, and once you've got all of those little aspects dialed, the easy bit, training for time trials. Now, simply take the duration of your event, and you can either then break it down and ride those efforts at a slightly higher intensity. So imagine your goal event is 30 minutes, break that down into 3 times 10 minutes, ride them almost flat out basically, so 105% of the sort of pace you expect to be able to hold for your goal event. Or if the efforts are longer, so imagine you're doing like a 25-mile time trial, quite popular here in the UK, break that down into 2 30-minute chunks. Again, you can either ride them then at a higher intensity than you expect to be able to maintain for your goal event, and if the event that you're training for is going to be longer, then you can simply reduce the intensity that little bit for some of your sessions, and then for some of your other sessions do shorter intervals and up the intensity. So imagine you're going to train for a 25-mile time trial, which is popular here in the UK again. You can ride along at 90% for that 1 hour period, or you could break it down to 2 chunks of 20 minutes, or 2 chunks of 15 minutes, or 3 chunks of 15 minutes, allowing yourself a good recovery in between those efforts. That gives you time to sit up, get used to training in the position. That's something I should have mentioned at the start actually. If you're training for time trials and you have a time trial bike, or you're training on a road bike and you're trying to get really aerodynamics and getting really tucked up on the bike, training in that position is going to be one of the most important things that you can do, because your muscles are activated in quite a different way if you're riding a time trial bike, or if you're riding in an aerodynamic position compared to when you're riding up and you're sat on the hoods, or you're doing lots of climbing. It's going to feel really different. Again, it's all about going fast, all about finding that correct cadence which feels really comfortable when you're sat in the saddle, and you just got to get used to being in that position, tucked up, nice and small, for as long as you possibly can. 2 to 3 sessions a week, I would say, as a maximum, is more than enough to see the gains and the improvements that you want to make. Otherwise, continue riding your other bikes, continue riding endurance rides. It's quite generic, really. And it really is the easy aspect when it comes to time trialing. And that's it. If there is anything I've left out, drop a question down below and I'll answer it in an upcoming question and answer. But otherwise, t-shirts available on the internet, so make sure you have a look. There's loads of information down in the description below for anything that you might want to ask as well. Otherwise, I'll see you all again soon.